Hey everybody, welcome to Nonprofit Everything. We've got something different for you today. Stacy and I got the most amazing question, and it was a very short question, but it turned into a phenomenally long conversation. So we would like to present this special episode on silo breaking. So this is there's only one question, so no skipping ahead. This is the whole thing. So we hope you enjoy it. Just to remind everybody that the Nonprofit Everything is a production of the Alliance for Nevada Nonprofits. So please go visit the ANN webpage. There's always a bunch of stuff going on. If you're not a member, go ahead and join. One of the best ways to support the podcast, other than giving Stacy and I high fives because we like that, is to actually become an ANN member. If your organization isn't an ANN member, encourage them to. It's only $150, and that helps make sure that this podcast stays a podcast, which is very, very helpful. And also it gives you access to a whole bunch of cool resources, the likes of which you will hear in the question that's coming up.
Nonprofit governance.
Nonprofit answers.
Nonprofit board.
Nonprofit management.
Nonprofit marketing.
Nonprofit resources.
The Alliance for Nevada Nonprofits presents Nonprofit Everything, the podcast about everything nonprofit, with your host, Andy Shurig and Stacy Wedding.
Today's episode is sponsored by Brenda J. Stout CPA, a full-service accounting firm specializing in nonprofit tax compliance and IRS problem resolution. Find out more at brendastoutcpa.com or check the Nonprofit Everything show notes for contact information. Thank you, Brenda J. Stout CPA.
Thank you, Brenda.
Do you have any advice on breaking down silos within an organization? And a possibly related question, any advice on how to break down silos between organizations with similar or complementary missions?
I love this question.
Isn't that a good one?
It's a great question. I think every person listening to this is probably nodding their head yes, is saying, yes, we have experienced that, right? So my personal belief is that oftentimes silos start with the leadership team or the leadership sort of structure of an organization. Now, that's talking about larger organizations or ones that have multiple staff.
Right.
And I think oftentimes when you have, director level positions that really haven't actually come together as a team themselves to get on the same page with how they work together, how they measure success, how they measure impact, and that I think bleeds down. And I also think it can become very pervasive, at least in organizations I've worked for before, where it's almost like that leader sets the tone, right? So that leader is the person that oftentimes will be like, leave it to, someone in development saying, those program people, they keep creating new programs, more stuff for us to raise money. So it's almost like they pit each other against each other without even realizing they're doing it.
Right, yeah.
So I don't know. So I mean, before I get into talking about solutions, I guess it's partly thinking about where does it stem from? I mean, I really think it's sort of an organizational culture, and leadership is where it starts oftentimes in an organization, and whatever level of staff that is at an organization. What do you think?
I think you're definitely right. The coming from the top, because so you think about it from a more practical perspective, like what's the actual challenge, right?
Right.
And so it's exactly what you say, is that the development staff is whining because programs just keeps adding more program stuff, right? And so now we have more stuff to raise money for, and so they're responsible. Nobody's given them the option of saying, hey, what do you think about this program, or why are we doing it? They don't get that kind of information ever. Right. They only get like, okay, so here's the goal this year, and this is what we're raising money for, and this is the stuff that you're going to talk to donors about. So you're right. It comes down to what the leadership, what information the leadership is providing, I think. But even then rolling it back a further step, because you started down that path of like, what's the actual problem?
Right.
I think the actual problem in like when you talk about silos, when you hear silos, again, you're right. You're mostly thinking about larger organizations. And what you're talking about is nobody is communicating with each other.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason they're not communicating with each other is because that's where their cheese is. The finance team is responsible. Their day one responsibility is to make sure that they get a nicely done audit and that the bills are paid on time and that there's enough money in the checking account to be able to pay payroll at the end of the week or whatever, right? So that's what they're mostly focused on, and so that's what they're going to spend their day thinking about. And because nonprofits are small and they're really efficient and there just aren't a lot of people just wandering around looking for stuff to do, like asking somebody from the accounting team, how do you, tell me about fundraising stuff, is that there's just not enough time in the day, right? No. So it does come down, you're right, to leadership to be able to provide that kind of, you have to recognize that it's a problem that you want to fix, and then figuring out how you're going to fix it.
I think there's also an interesting, I actually, this is sort of top of mind because I was just actually talking to another nonprofit about this recently, and they are not that large of an organization, and they only have really 3 or 4 senior level staff, and they still are experiencing silos. And they were talking a bit about how there's this sort of each department was creating its own strategic plan. And like for that department. And I was cringing, right? Because that's one way I think that you can really come together as a staff, like in some way, have everyone be a part, even if it's not that everyone is a part of an all-day retreat, but they are a part of helping shape the future, the goals, and create sort of these joint goals and talking through how those goals aren't just met by one department, right? For development can't do their job without, finance having a great accounting and putting donor dollars where they need to and having programs that they can sell, right? So it's this whole kind of, I think it's an opportunity when you think about sort of shared goals to really bring together the team in some fashion, even if it's just the leadership team that then communicates it down to their respective teams, depending on the size of the organization. There's huge opportunity to do that, to make sure you're all sort of working united and not like, okay, you're in your little box and compartment, you're creating your like department's plan. I mean, how does that work, right? Because you're going to need it doesn't work. It's not that nice and neat, right?
Right. Yeah, and nonprofits, to be honest, are way ahead in this.
Yes.
If you compare a nonprofit to a for-profit, one of the founding principles of all nonprofit is that you have to have a mission.
Yes.
So, and everybody needs to agree on it. And so you're already way ahead of all of these other organizations that struggle to try to figure out, okay, so what's the point of our business? Well, it's to make money. Okay, that's super vague.
Right.
So of course everybody's going to be running off in their own direction. So you're right, like coming up, like having everybody do their own strategic plan that's crazy town.
Right.
I don't know what the point of that would be. So the strategies that we usually see to approach that, okay, first of all, everybody sort of recognizes that silos are bad.
Yes.
If you ask somebody like, should your organization have silos? Everybody's going to say absolutely not.
Let's hope they say that.
Yeah, because you recognize that the teams that work together and everybody understands what everybody's working on are going to be more effective. And if we're all pointed the same direction and, if all our oars are in the water at the same time, right?
Yes.
We're going to do much better. So the first prescription a lot of times is the org chart. Is somebody says, well, maybe you need to tweak the org chart. This question is so great. We're going to go on for hours on this one.
I know.
So, okay, so another question, I can't remember if we've gotten this one or not, or if we had one a lot. It may have been a very long time ago, is should marketing and development be 2 separate teams or should there be the same team, right?
Right.
So I've heard that a bunch.
Right.
I've been in organizations that have struggled with how do you put that stack together, because you sort of recognize they need to work hand in glove.
Absolutely.
Like marketing and development should always 100% of the time be on the same page. They should be working for the exact same goals. So should they be supervised by the same person? And is it possible to find someone who's very, very skilled in both of those jobs? It's probably hard because they're 2 different jobs
they really
and they take,
are.
right?
They really are.
So like tweaking your org chart. I mean, there is a big company in town who spent a lot of time and money tweaking their org chart and did it really in a really fancy, complicated way, right? Mm-hmm. And those of you who know you probably know who we're talking about. If you're not, send us an instant message on Facebook and we will tell you.
We'll give you the little behind the scenes.
Yeah. And if you work for that company, you want to come talk about it, we'd love to hear that
yes.
too. But so like very large organizations spend an awful lot of time trying to figure out, is the org chart the solution? And I don't know that it is. I don't know that I've ever seen anybody. I mean, people always it's like moving the chairs around. Right. Like it shouldn't make any difference because again, you're going back to an employee sitting at my desk doing my job and worried about one thing, and that is my boss happy with what I'm doing?
Right.
Right? Is what I'm expected to do what I'm doing, and I'm doing a good job? And do the people that are laterally from me 4 departments away, I know I should know what they're doing, and I know I should be concerned about that, but that's not my cheese.
Yes, exactly.
Right?
And I'm not going to get, carrot stick, right? I'm not going to get rewarded with,
Right.
yeah.
That's not a carrot or a stick.
Right.
It's just like, it's lariat.
Yes. Well, and to that point, I mean, I think there's also, there's this sense that, the org chart feels like it's like, that's something what some high-paid consultant would come in and tell you to change your org chart. And I'm like,
don't pay that guy.
Don't pay that person. Because at the end of the day, we all know that that's not what we're really talking about. I mean, it's Andy, to what you said earlier. It really comes back to communication and sort of internal systems. So, I mean, for me, I think strategies are right. It's shared goal setting. And I'm talking beyond the mission, right? The mission is your core. But here's the thing. People forget about the mission all the time, right? Because they're in the weeds doing their work. So I think some sort of always bringing, just like we have, hopefully, mission moments at a board meeting, mission moments at a staff meeting is a great thing too. Let's bring us back to our mission, and then let's talk about our strategic goals and where we're going and how we're all contributing. I mean, I think it's a huge way to kind of fix this problem or help reduce it. The other thing is, what if, think about the measurement when people get evaluated, right? I think we could turn this on its head and say the evaluation tool is what maybe needs to change, the performance evaluation tool, because all the things you're talking about are people want, right? I want to do a good job, or I want to check these 10 boxes so I get a decent review and maybe I get a raise, whatever that is. What if that was turned on its head and it truly was about more of, there might be little pieces of that, but more of a shared team goal, because then it's kind of all right, we need marketing, we need programs, we need development, we need finance. And if one of those pieces isn't working, we're not going to reach our group goal. And to be incented with whether it's a raise or some, pay raise, what if it is in the evaluation structure, right? That people are starting to be measured. Sure, they've got to be measured about things related to their department, but there's also sort of an opportunity for a bonus or some other structure if you actually meet the shared team goal, meaning team across the organization, not within your department.
Yeah, we've implemented things like that before.
Right.
I think the challenge that we have with that is, again, that for example, if you're on the finance team and part of your performance review is based on big picture strategic goals, which is, did the fundraising team meet their stretch goal? You don't feel like you have any agency over that challenge, right? And if you don't feel like you have any I have no control over whether or not they raise the money. What can I even do? And then you sort of let it, it'll,
You sort of just give up on it.
Yeah, it'll happen whether or not I have something to do. So what you need to find, I think you're onto something, but what you need to find is the activities that make an employee more likely to be good at breaking down silos.
Yes.
So from because you can look at it from the executive director perspective, or the board's perspective. So you're looking top down, and you're going to sort of impose some sort of structure on the organization to make it so that silos are less likely. But I think because most of our listeners are not probably executive directors or board members, most of our listeners are line staff.
Yeah.
And I think this question came from line staff too, is how to, as an organization, because you recognize it inside, right?
Yes. If
you're working on a team and you're like, man, marketing and development hate each other. So how do we figure this one out? And it's to find out what those human behaviors are that break down those silos. So one of them, and it's the one that I'm the most uncomfortable with, just because I'm Andy.
That says it all right there.
And it's something that you have to work. I've recognized that about myself. I need to work on it. Is that you need to actively, as an employee, you need to spend time everywhere else in the organization. You need to. I mean, I'm a generalist. I like all parts of the organization. I'm interested in everything.
Yes.
Which kind of makes me I'm not good at anything. I'm kind of sort of mediocre at a lot of things.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. But the the challenge then is, again, because your cheese is in one place, like you don't have the incentive to go and like really spend time in other departments figuring out what they do. And people will, and this is where I'm bad at, is people would walk, up to the door of my office and go like, "Hey, what's up?" And my brain is like, "Go away."
Right. I have
like,
too much. You're bugging me.
A to-do list
Yes.
that's got stuff on it for the last 2.5 years that I haven't gotten to. And I know your kids are adorable.
Right.
They really are. My kids are adorable too. I don't have time to talk to you about kids, right? So so it's like a really...
That's so real. That is so real. And it's so true.
Yeah.
Yes.
And, and there are people, and the problem is that some of these people, they get a reputation within the organization as being problematic because they're not on task. Like, why are you wandering around the office?
Right.
Like, why are you talking to everybody? But the reality is that those are your silo breakers.
Right.
Those are the people that talk to everybody, that are naturally social, that want to network within the organization, that knows, like, did you know that this other department is even doing this? You're like, and maybe it's a tattle, right? Maybe it's somebody who comes in to do, did you know what Larry's doing? Right? Like, or something like that. And then, again, your instinct as a grown-up is be like, come on, like, that's so elementary school. But like, those are the people that are within the organization that are wandering around and doing all those things. So maybe you want to incentivize those people to be those sort of the lubrication between departments. So that's one way to do it.
Absolutely. And what I like about that, I mean, there's I think some formal roles and informal roles with this, right? And formally, you can do things like making sure you have sort of shared goal setting like we talked about, or joint meetings across departments or across, with different people in an organization that aren't just platitudes, but that truly are meaningful meetings, so that you actually are creating sort of, it's part of the culture we communicate, right? But those are formal. And I think there's also needed, like, you can't just have formal, nor can you just have the informal, what you're talking about, because one person who is just bouncing around to different departments is probably not, that's not going to be enough either. It's like you need both of those, right? You need the formal structure and systems and that informal.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think you can. So there are a couple of things about. So the employee that's just wandering around wasting everybody's time, right? I don't think that's probably the solution, but that's the behavior that you want to. You don't want to quash it. You want to give that person the tools. Then sort of recognize that this is what you're good at. Like, you talk to everybody all the time. I'd like you get your work done, but also while you're talking to everybody, like, can you find out? Like, can you be sort of a go-between? Like, see if you can get this person to be. Was like Mercury from the Greek gods, whose job it was just to be the go-between between all the Greek gods, and like everybody liked them, and like he just kind of did what he did, and right. So like, have somebody be Mercury and have that be their responsibility, and then sort of instill some of those. You have to train somebody to why they're doing it, right? To sort of find that natural inclination. But as you're talking about formal things, that you're right. The other formal thing to do, and people big for-profit companies do this all the time, is if they have like a big initiative or a big project, they're very cognizant of taking somebody from all of the different functional areas and putting them together on the project.
Absolutely.
So it's not like, so if you're doing this big, IT implementation, you're installing a brand new ERP system, it can't just be IT doing it.
No.
You need everybody in the entire organization, even if they're not going to necessarily use it, they need to be involved so that they can understand why it's there and what it's going to do, and make sure that they're all sort of on that shared goal. So we'll talk about another practical example. So one that I deal with a lot of times, and I've got clients that are doing this all the time, is the challenge that we have between finance and fundraising. So the purpose of finance is to make sure that the books are right and that people get paid and that we've got enough cash flow, that the cash flow is in such a way so that we can actually pay the bills when they're due. Right. So that's their primary responsibility. Right. And then of course your finance team is always, everything else that nobody does gets stacked on them too. So sometimes they do HR, sometimes they do IT, kind of pile, CFO, you just pile everything on the CFO, right? They'll do whatever. They can't say no. They don't know how.
Poor CFOs. We're sending you some love and some hugs. Okay.
It's a hard job.
Yeah.
But the challenge is that, fundraising is out there and they've got a lot of data that has to do with money. And sometimes that data is not in the format that finance needs it. Or there's confusion about the difference between what's an internal report, like what should we be judged on? Like what's my goal? Like, how do you count money toward my goal as a fundraiser? that may be completely different from how it's supposed to appear in the financial statements, and that's okay. But getting the two groups to understand that, they're really, they have the same purpose in mind, but there's ways that they can communicate and like understand. So for me as a CFO, like I didn't start in finance. I started all over the organization. So I spent time as a fundraiser. So I know how direct mail works. I've done all that kind of stuff before. So when the development team asks questions about stuff, like I understand where they're coming from and why they're asking for it and what they're trying to get at, just because I've already been there. So
and not a lot of people have had that experience.
Yeah, nobody has. Like, how many people can you, like, if I can't think of anybody else that I know that started like in sort of the soft side and ended up on the harder side of nonprofits. It's very rare. And so that's why I do spend a lot of time working on that specific activity and sort of explaining, like, you have to understand why they're doing, the fundraising team has to understand why finance is being such a jerk about this.
Yes.
Like why they're making you like do all these things in this really complicated way and tracking things and like the conversations that we have about like tracking pledges and all of the work you need to do to track a pledge, because what they don't realize is the auditor is like, punching you in the face, literally punching you in the face, trying to get you to get that information. And like, you're like, there's a breakdown. Plus, as a side note, nobody has designed a fundraising system and a finance system that talk properly.
No.
Like, so that the information is always sort of smashing against each other, and unless you understand it all super, super well, it's going to be a mess. But that level of empathy, like number one, like understanding what that other person's, putting yourself in their shoes, knowing what their responsibilities are and why they're getting that, they're trying to do that, like getting that level of empathy first. And then number two, even if you just don't have the empathy, if you're like me and you just don't care, right? If the empathy is not there, just ask questions until you get to the point where you understand where they're coming from, right? And learning how to ask the appropriate questions. Like, say, why do you, instead of saying like, you don't need that, or I can't give that to you, you say like, can
help
you
me
explain?
Understand. Yeah. Help me understand why. Like what can you help me understand?
What does that do for you?
Yeah, what that does for you and why. Yeah. And it's interesting because I think sometimes those conversations not only help clarify things for both people, sometimes the person being asked the question realizes, wow, I really don't need it. We have this kind of antiquated system that maybe we don't and sometimes we don't ask ourselves why are we doing it, right? Yeah, it's just, hey, it's just the way we've always done it. So no, I love the asking questions thing because that's what kept striking me when you were saying it is, I certainly believe, and I'm a big empath, so I relate to that side of it. But I also think that it is really trying to understand, like, you're never going to become, as a finance person, most likely, they're not going to be like you, Andy. Most likely, they're not going to be a development expert, and development people, professionals aren't going to be finance experts. But could there be even wouldn't that be a cool, like, mini retreat, right? To have there's the ongoing question asking, but also having a retreat to sort of say, can we understand, like, here's a question I've always had, or like, let's have a little discussion about kind of help me understand Finance 101, everything you want me to know as a development person, as from your finance role, and the things that are your biggest pet peeves, like, share with me and help me understand why, and vice versa, let me do the same. Like, that would be powerful, breaking down those walls and just having that dialogue that nobody's having.
Yeah, it sounds excruciating to me, but I think
it does?
You're right. It's just me.
Oh God! All right,
I'm
a nerd and I like that
conversations about
stuff.
feelings. I know.
Oh, God.
Okay, so I think we've beaten that one into the ground. But so let's ask the second half of the question now, finally, which is like, can some of these things be transferred to collaboration between organizations with similar missions and goals?
So absolutely. And I honestly, what I think, though, what I love about this question is I do think it needs to start within an organization. You've got to get yourself breaking down the silos within your organization before you're going to even have a chance to do that externally, right? It's a whole other layer of complexity when it's two organizations trying to break down silos versus just within your own organization. And that's hard enough. So the one thing I would say is it's going to take time, right? First, to get your own house sort of in order before you're even sort of in a spot where you can even entertain that idea with somebody else. What do you like? Would you agree with that, or
somewhat?
Okay,
somewhat. I see what you're saying.
Like, because I feel like if you're divided yourself, people are going to feel that in another organization. Do you get what I'm saying? Like, right? Like, if you don't have your own house in order, and then you start trying to break down silos with someone else, they're going to be like, oh, well, do I talk to finance or program or your fundraiser or your CEO, or who do I talk to? Like, and like, it's going to come out. It's going to manifest itself just there. Like, it's kind of like the principles that come with this. Right? Communication, empathy, asking questions, some of the stuff we're talking about, right? You could take all that and transfer that.
Yeah. So that's kind of what I was thinking too, is that it's you can use the same prescription on that other problem. Is that even if it's not a problem, is because you need to encourage your people. You need to provide some sort of reward structure for your people to go outside the organization and to interface with other organizations that are doing the same kind of work that you're doing or doing work that's similar. So that's like how many, I know it's very small, like the number of people, like if you're a fundraiser, maybe you go to AFP, right? And you go and you talk to other fundraisers. So okay, that's not that. That's professional development.
Yes.
That's learning skills, right? The same thing. I mean, I think hi, Anne. Thank you for supporting the podcast. Yes. Thank you for producing it. But that's another opportunity where you have a whole bunch of different organizations that are together just by virtue of being a nonprofit.
Yeah.
So there's no specific thing that they're working on, but coming up with that same sort of annoying person who goes from place to place, like. Think of it as a networking exercise. So if you're trying to get a job,
right.
Like one of the things that you do when you're trying to get a job is you call everybody that you know and you go and you have coffee with them, you have lunch with them, you talk to them on the phone, you do whatever you do in the age of the internet to like communicate with them about like, here's where I'm at in my life and this is what I want to do. And you do that sort of networking.
Yes.
So what can you do as an organization to encourage networking among service providers or people in the sector that are doing things that are the same or similar to you?
I think it's as easy as even going. We know there's a lot of convenings and sort of large scale initiatives that are going on in the state that you do bring people all working toward a similar goal or working, whether, it's homelessness or education or whatever this is, like you get all the providers or people who are interested in that in the room. But what's fascinating is you see the whole staff of this organization sit together at this table, and the whole staff of this organization sit together at this table. They're not even like trying to break it up with as simple as maybe we should mix it up. And maybe it's sort of our organization rule that each of us goes and sort of sits at a table with people we don't know or that we'd like to learn more about. I mean, that's such a basic thing. Yeah. And yet that's where it starts.
Yeah. And part of it too is we have in the nonprofit sector, and we see it all the time. You talk about it and explain that it's not a challenge, but you see it over and over, is that it's sort of the fixed pie problem, right?
Yes.
There's only so much funding available, and it needs to be, and we want to get as much of it as we can because our mission is most important, and we are the most effective at reaching our mission, right? That's
Yes.
So collaboration with other organizations then feels like, in a lot of cases, that it could be. I mean, even if you're not saying it out loud, somewhere in the back of your mind, you're thinking like, is this an organization that we want to give some of our resources to? Like, because we're trying to get our own stuff done, do we want to give some of our resources away in order to collaborate? So like that's a much harder and much more complex question. I mean, we talk about mergers in the nonprofit sector all the time, like how mergers should be happening all the time, but there's no reward for a merger whatsoever.
No.
Is that the only thing that happens in a merger is a bunch of people lose their jobs.
Yes.
So, there's no, I mean, it may benefit the community. It may make more sense, but if you have two organizations, and you don't, but if you have two organizations that were literally doing the exact same thing in the exact same service area and the exact same way, like they would never merge just because there's no incentive to get them to merge at all. No. I mean, unless one organization is troublesome or failing or something like that, and you might get absorbed and you might call it a merger, but that's not the same thing. So it's a bigger problem that you need to sort of get your head around when you recognize that, if you're going to collaborate with another nonprofit, oh my gosh, like how many funders say, please, we would like to fund a collaboration. That was, I don't know, is it as big as it is now? As it used to be super big.
It still is. And I'm rolling my eyes because, sorry, you can't see that, but just I'm rolling my eyes because I love, I love funders who are always promoting collaboration. They're not willing to, sorry, I'm going to get on a tangent, but they're not willing to invest in it. They don't understand the time it takes, and they themselves are not collaborating. But okay, I'm off my soapbox. Anyway, But I actually even think, though, there is some power in funders have a seat at the table with being able to influence collaboration, right? I mean, let's be honest. There's the incentive. So back to the pie issue. So if we're going to be rewarded for collaborating, and maybe the funder even is helping us understand what that means for them, and not, you got to do what's right for your organization. I'm not saying do this to chase the money, but there are ways funders can set up systems, right, that reward, okay, it's not about giving you nonprofit 20 grand, giving you 50 grand. It's about, we need to solve this issue in this community. That's the shared goal, right? And there's going to be players that all of you are going to play a role, sort of a service delivery model, but it's not going to be about, and we'll figure out what those ratios look like and who's providing what service. You're all going to get a piece of the pie. But at the end of the day, this isn't about, oh, good, XYZ organization gets to come back and tell me all the great stuff they did. It's about how are we as a collective moving, collective impact, moving this forward. I think there's some power in that. I don't think it's happening enough. I would love to see that happen more.
Yeah. And again, it's the reward structure.
Yes,
right?
it is reward.
Because if you don't, if there's no benefit to your organization, because remember the challenge even at the lowest level of getting the development people to talk to the finance people politely, right? That at the lowest level, that the only reason that that's not happening is not because those are horrible people who are having, just don't like people that are different or whatever. Yeah. It's because people they're doing what they're being told to do. They're being rewarded for meeting their fundraising goal, or for making sure that we don't have to tell everybody, hey, cash your paycheck right now, by the way, right? Which is the ultimate fail for the finance team. So the getting them to recognize that there is time in the day, and that they are going to be rewarded for being annoying and going to talk to other organizations. And think about the executive director who the staff is always whining about the executive director because they're never in the office. Yeah. Right. Yeah. So on one hand, you go, okay, they're probably doing important things. Most likely they're going out and dealing with donors and visiting client sites and doing whatever it is the executive director is doing. But from a staff perspective, they're I'm being neglected.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
So explain, for the executive director can then explain, this is what I expect from all of you. I don't want to see you in your office 40 hours a week, 8 hours a day, 40 hours a week. I don't want to see you sitting in your chair. Yeah. I'm going to reward you for doing things that are outside of your area of expertise, whether it is internally, dealing with figuring out what everybody else is doing inside, and forcing people to do it if they're not going to do it on their own, because a lot of accounting people just aren't going to get out of their chair if you don't force them to, right? And then, but also externally, say, hey, I would like you to go to this networking event. I want you to go to this thing. Find ways for people to engage. Go to somebody else's stupid lunchtime gala event, right? That nobody wants to go to.
Well, and you know what? What I love is what this all boils down to is sort of where we kind of started a little bit at the beginning. But if there was a performance evaluation system where maybe it's some of that stuff, right? Yeah, There's where it comes back to. How many external outreaches have you had? And it doesn't matter what position you are in the organization. What have you done? Mm-hmm. Talk to us about it. What did you learn from that? Right? Because then I think it's more than it becomes more than just doing it. Then it's create the process internally where you get to share, here was an aha I had, or here's an opportunity I see to collaborate with them. The other thing I think about related to collaboration is that it doesn't just happen overnight. You and I both know this. Start small. There's that whole spectrum of collaboration where collaboration is sort of the pinnacle at the end, but there is a lot of steps of building the trust, coordination, right? Just simply coordination, which is different than collaboration, or just hey, yeah, we're going to refer, we know you do this and we don't do this, so we're going to refer to you. And I don't consider that collaboration. A lot of people would put that as collaboration. I think that's coordination and being aware of services, but truly figuring out, maybe it's how do we map that journey out? And maybe we got to build trust, and we start small, and then we move, once we keep building trust between both organizations, guess what? Now we're collaborating, and we didn't even know, like, we don't even know how it happened. It just sort of happened.
Yeah. I mean, and it even starts at the lowest level with just like networking.
Yes.
Like find somebody in an organization that's doing something similar to you and just go to lunch with them and talk about stuff. I mean, you don't have to, it doesn't have to be something formal. It has to be, you take those little baby steps. And you're right, bake it into the organization so that it becomes part of your culture, so that it doesn't just go away when everything starts to get tough and you're like, oh, that fluffy stuff, we're not going to do it anymore. Make sure that that's part of what your organization is and how it works. And that's going to take a lot of time.
Yeah, it is.
It's not an easy prescription. This is a long-term thing, which is probably why it was a long answer to a relatively short question.
It was, but it was a great question.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us today. Gosh, that was an intense topic, wasn't it? And one I think we all probably have our own opinions on and can resonate with. So we hope we've given you some food for thought to think about how you can break down the silos within your organization and perhaps with other organizations. Because, hey, I'm going to be a little, cheesy here, but I think the world and community will be a better place if we do that, right? So anyways, thank you so much for joining us for another episode of Nonprofit Everything. If you liked this episode, share it. We would love for other people to let's start a dialogue about this. That's where it starts, with silo breaking. And thanks as always to Ann, Alliance for Nevada Nonprofits, for making this possible for all of you. Until next time.